Welcome to our New York City Multi-Faith Justice Mayoral Forum. We are so glad you are here. Thank you for joining us. A special thank you to our candidates for being here on this beautiful afternoon. My name is the Reverend Schuyler Vogel, the Senior Minister of the Fourth Universalist Society, and I'm proud to represent, along with everyone here, a forum led by a coalition of over 800 congregations and thousands of people throughout the 5 boroughs. We here believe that faith has a vital role in the public square, working for the collective liberation of all New Yorkers while combating the many systems of oppression that plague our city. Together, our diverse faith calls us to advocate, agitate, witness, organize, hold accountable, and love this city into a true sanctuary for all. We hope we do that today. Our forum will have 2 45-minute segments with 3 mayoral candidates present at each. If you would prefer to listen in Spanish, we hope you will select the translation button at the bottom of your screen. You may also select the closed captioning option, as well as live stream this video on the Middle Collegiate Church's Facebook and YouTube page. All questions asked today have been workshopped ahead of time with our co-sponsors. As we begin, it is also right to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional and ancestral land of the Munsee Lenape people. We honor their vibrant past and present and commit ourselves to supporting Indigenous rights and sovereignty across the globe. Thank you again for being here. We begin today with a faith reflection offered by Aniqa Nawabi, the Executive Director of the Muslim Faith Network.
Thank you so much, Reverend Schuler, and congratulations again to all the candidates who are part of this Multi-Faith Justice Forum. Faith is an important part of all of us, and the faith communities are one of the largest communities, the most diverse communities of New York City. At MCN, Muslim Community Network, our goal is to bridge and build friendship with our interfaith partners. And the diversity of organizations represented here today is demonstrative of how diverse our communities are and how together, when we work together, we can bring our public leaders together. And I wanted to basically just mention that the candidates who are on this forum today, very much like the prophets of Islam, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Sikhism, of Hinduism, they are also fighting for a very similar goal, which is justice, which is trying to address the needs of the most vulnerable of our communities and trying to design a system and a society that is equal, that brings justice, and that also raises harmony among the different people that we all interact with, our neighbors. And hence, I want to just say that with that, I'd like to do a little pitch to our candidates for a resolution that MCN, along with a dozen other faith institutions, have worked with, Resolution 1257, that educates our communities, our diverse communities, about our religious traditions in our public schools. And this is a huge step to be able to fight the misconceptions and the hate and the bigotry that exist in our society. So just bringing it back to our faith traditions again, you all as candidates, you have that characteristic of our prophets, where you are fighting for justice for all of us. And so I hope that with that, you bring with you the vision, the policies that really work to empower all of us in New York City. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anika. Welcome again officially, Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, and Ray McGuire to this first part of our Mayoral Forum. I'm so honored also to introduce the Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis, Rabbi Lauren Grabelle Herrmann, and Crystal Walthall, our esteemed moderators for today. We have 3 buckets that we will focus our time on today. Those are racial justice with a focus on policing and criminal reform, economic justice with a focus on homelessness and low-income housing, and immigration. We understand that racial justice is the umbrella that intersects all of these things. And because of that, we will be starting off today with racial justice. Our speakers know that they have 2 minutes to answer all of the questions. And we have a timekeeper who will come in, turn on her video when you have 15 seconds left, and then we'll audibly stop you when your time is up. So without further ado, let's get into conversation. And I'm so honored to introduce and to kick it off to the Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis for segment 1, racial justice.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you today, and that you would engage us in these conversations is very helpful. So my first question to all of you is, the death of George Floyd brought folks around the globe and New York into the streets in protest. The New York Times did some reporting late May, early June last year that included videos of New York police in violent clashes with peaceful protesters. What's your stand on policing the police? Reform, defund, demilitarize, abolish, something else? Please be specific and let us know what you're thinking about that.
And Jacqui, we're going to start with Adams. Eric, if you could answer first.
Thank you, Amanda.
Didn't realize I was muted. Thank you for that. This has been a long journey for me for about 45 years, from the days that I was arrested and assaulted by police officers in the 103rd Precinct, and civil rights leaders led by Reverend Herbert Daughtry pulled me out of the National Black United Front, where I was a youth leader, to fight against police reform, and basically gave us instructions to go into the police department and fight from within. Day one, when I was in the police academy, several weeks later, Eleanor Bumpus was shot and killed. I left the police academy after my courses and went to the Bronx and marched with the protesters on behalf of Eleanor Bumpus and her family. When we talk about police reform, we need to agitate, legislate, and negotiate. All of those things go together, and they must be coordinated. Number one, we need to stop allowing police officers who are abusive to remain in the department for a long period of time. 60 days, have an internal departmental trial to make the determination to have them removed from the department. It should not have taken 4 years for Pandaleo to be finally removed from the department after killing Eric Garner. Number two, we need to really redefine the ecosystem of public safety. It can't be police responding to everything. I believe that if we take a more holistic approach, dealing with youth groups, clergy groups, something that I have funded, the God Squad, the faith-based initiatives, we can do a better job of really dealing with the issues around public safety and policing. Lastly, we should use our dollars in the police department to be up with thinking, not downstream thinking. We should be proactive to prevent crimes instead of just responding to crimes.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Thank you so much. Mr. McGuire, second, please.
Ray McGuire, did you say?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Thank you. I am struck by Aniqa's opening comments in a letter that was written in 1963 by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, when he talked about race and religion, which is the same time he met Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King Jr. talked about injustice anywhere being a threat to justice everywhere. I did go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, with Mother Gwen Carr, who, as you know, is the mother of the movement, who has endorsed me. And if I think about policing the way I think about it today, I want the police to protect me and not profile me. My plan in specific is to restructure the NYPD, have a deputy mayor for public safety who interacts with the folks in the neighborhood as well as with the NYPD, day-to-day management, to make certain that chain of command is held accountable when one or more officers is involved in a situation, the entire chain of command is involved. I want to make certain that I develop and create an emergency social services office. 4 to 5 of the 10 calls that now go to 911 have to do with mental health challenges. So we need to have a core of mental health care professionals who are prepared to be with and sometimes go before the NYPD, but to intervene. I'm going to give the CCRB full investigative authority, and rather than take 48 days to review video cam footage, I'm going to have them do them in 48 hours. They will make a recommendation to my commissioner, who will uphold the values that I outlined of respect, accountability, and proportionality. And that commissioner will make a recommendation. I will have ultimate accountability for that. Then I'm going to invest in the community organizations. I'm going to return to community policing. I'm going to invest in the on the ground kind of violence interrupters. I want to make sure that our youth have summer jobs. I can prevent what's taking place in the neighborhood. So first, I'm going to restructure the police, and then I'm going to make sure that I invest in the communities. That's why I'm going to go about restructuring to make certain that there is respect, accountability, and proportionality.
Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you. Maya Wiley, please.
You're on mute, Maya.
Thank you, Eric. It's an honor to be with all of you. And let me just say, as coming from parents who were churched, but also activists in the civil rights movement, where the interfaith nature of that movement was a critical and important part of its strength, because it recognized that while Dr. King said the moral arc of the universe bends at the elbow of justice, we have to bend it. And I, as a Black woman, know 2 things. And one is what it feels like to fear crime and what it feels like to fear police violence. And it is simply untrue that we have to choose one of those fears rather than resolve both. And so I've already laid out a plan that's going to put the public back in public safety. And what I mean by that are 3 things. One, it means removing from the New York City Police Department all the functions that shouldn't be seen as police functions in the first place. That means mental health crisis response is what I will invest in rather than calling 911 and getting a badge and a gun, as well as traffic, routine traffic stops and school safety. Number 2 is making sure that we have the accountability structure that starts with a police commissioner that's on mission to transformation, because I'm going to take $1 billion out of the New York City Police Department to invest in our communities in things like challenging gun violence by helping it make it easier to get a job than a gun, putting trauma-informed care in the schools, and creating a participatory justice fund so that communities direct resources. That was actually number 3. I said number 2. But on accountability, it's having a police commissioner on mission to then what remains of the New York City Police Department reorient it around problem solving rather than problem creating, and a police commissioner that doesn't come up through the rank and file and is a civilian.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much. We're going to go back in the same order again. So we'll come to you, Eric, with this question first. Mr. Adams, Eric Adams, I want to be respectful there. So given, though, that the history of policing began in the slave patrols, what would you do as mayor to dismantle the legacy of white supremacy in our police department? Be as specific as you can, please.
Well, and you're right. It began in the South during slave patrol, and in the North, it was put in place to protect property, and really has a history of being abusive, homophobic, anti-Semitic, racist. That is at the core of policing in America. And so there's a couple of things we need to do. Number 1, we need to diversify the department. It's far too often, when you look at over 30% of our offices are coming from outside the city of New York. They're not representative of the people who live in the city. I am going to promote peace officers who are in the civil service peace officers, hospital police, school safety agents, DOT, etc. Promote them after 2 years so they can go into the police department after having excellent service. And why is that important? Over 85% of them are Black and brown, 100% are New Yorkers. We will start to see members of your church, our police officers, their children will be in our schools. It's a different relationship. Number 2, we have to really change the culture. There's in-service training that takes place every year in the police department. They only go one time to learn how to shoot their guns. We're going to turn that around and use that in-service training to identify those officers who are experiencing PTSD and they no longer have the capacity to be police officers. Many officers are experiencing vicarious trauma, and they should not be patrolling the streets. But we do nothing to periodically check on their mental state and their mental conditions. That's why we're seeing a high level of suicides among the police department. Number 3 is zero tolerance. We need to create an environment in the department where those officers who are doing their jobs, they are comfortable with coming forward and reporting those officers who are not. Right now, it goes to the Internal Affairs Bureau. It's a big mistake. That's an internal mechanism that no one has any faith in, and we're going to turn that around and have an external review.
Thank you so much, Eric Adams. Thank you. Ray McGuire, same question to you. The policing comes from slave patrols and taking property back. What would you do to dismantle white supremacy in the police force? Be as specific as you can, please.
You know, when I started in my career 36 years ago, there's only 1 or 2 people anywhere on the globe who look like me. And so that meant that I had to break down doors and extend the ladder and get those people who were the top performers in positions of responsibility where they can take on leadership roles. And so I have a track record of having done that. And the way that we reform and address the systemic inequities to which you referred, about which I've written a foreword, the way that we do this is to get examples of people who are the best at what they do in leadership roles. Today, if you look at the majority minority in the NYPD, then look at the number of people who are in leadership roles, there's a stark difference between that. And so what I would do is to make certain that when an open position came up, I would apply the Rooney Rule to make certain that they included the most diverse candidates to be in leadership positions, like precinct captains, where lots of the decisions are taking place on the ground, and make certain that the classes which were recruited reflected the complexion and the diversity of the neighborhood, which meant that as we move forward, we need to have people who live in the city, in the communities. I would return to community policing, so you develop the relationships. Part of this is the experiences that we've had, many of which have been formed by history. That history is a history that we need to address directly. And the way we do that is get people in leadership roles, and then return as close as we can to safe cities, safe streets, where the community and law enforcement interact with each other. And we need, by definition, to hold the serial abusers for whom we pay $200 million a year accountable. And once we have that accountability, and once we've had that accountability, then we can begin to restore the relationship between the community and law enforcement. Today, that relationship has clearly been breached. I'd make certain that the leaders in the NYPD reflected the diversity of New York City.
Thank you, Ray McGuire. Appreciate that. Maya Wiley, please. Same question.
First of all, I'm going to recognize that there's mayoral control of the New York City Police Department, not just the New York City schools. Mm-hmm. And that does mean appointing a commissioner that's on mission, as I said, for transformation. There has to be a residency requirement. It is one of the reasons that we have folks policing our communities that aren't from or understanding our communities. Mm-hmm. But really, we have to reorient policing in a completely different direction, because this thing called problem solving can be real, but it requires changing what the job description is. Because rather than saying your job is to arrest Eric Garner because he was allegedly selling a loose cigarette, an untaxed cigarette, was exactly why we're criminalizing poverty, rather than saying that actually in that instance, when store owners are calling the police department to complain about competition for their businesses, that's actually not a public safety issue. And a reoriented police department would recognize, as a problem solver, there's a problem, but it is not a policing problem, and actually work in partnership, not only with communities, but certainly with communities, but actually with the rest of government, because right now it's frankly a rogue department. And rather say, hello, there's a problem here for the Economic Development Corporation and Small Business Services and other engines of government to come together and solve. And we're calling your attention to it. And that kind of partnership goes beyond what we traditionally think about community policing to a very different model of problem solving. There's research behind it. But I'll say one other thing, that this notion of the rules of the road matters. Camden, New Jersey has an 18-page excessive force policy. The rules of the road are black and white. Rather than giving discretion to the police department, I will make sure that we have a public process where we set the rules of the road, and it will no longer be just a 4-page excessive force policy. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. I'm here to ask you guys some questions about homelessness and housing as part of a larger conversation around economic justice. As people of faith, we view the fact that nearly 60,000 people are currently homeless, experiencing homelessness in New York and in New York City, and 17,000 of them are children, as a moral failing and an ethical imperative. So we want to know, as mayor, what strategies you're going to employ to ensure that everyone in the city has not only a right to shelter, but a right to housing. We want you to be as specific as possible. For example, would you consider transforming empty hotels or apartment buildings into permanent housing? Would you extend a moratorium on evictions? Please be as specific as possible. We're going to begin with Mr. McGuire. Thank you.
The answer is, as I look at what is taking place in New York City, 40 to 45% of New Yorkers are rent burdened, which means that they pay more than 50 to 60% of their income in rent. If I look at how we built, when we built in New York City, we built 2.2 units of housing for every private sector job. Today, we build 0.5 to 0.7. We need to address that. And when we built recently, what is very clear, that the demand is so outstretched the supply that New York has become way too expensive. So my plan is to increase the housing stock in New York City by 10%, 350,000 units, to make sure that I build deeply affordable housing for the area median income of those who make less than $50,000, which are many of our front-end workers. So we need to address that. And I have a plan at rayformayor.com that addresses just that. When it gets to homelessness, the idea and the strategy that we have with respect to homelessness is to prevent homelessness today. We need to increase the number of vouchers that are outstanding so that we get people from being homeless into shelters shortly, and then through that into homes. My plan is to go from homelessness to home ownership. And to do that by, one, let's make certain that we extend the eviction moratorium and raise the amount that we've allocated from $130 to $400 million to make certain those New Yorkers who cannot afford it can stay in their homes. That's number one. Number two, for the homeless, prevent the homelessness and get them into shelters temporarily. I say temporarily because we need to fix the shelters today. Those shelters are dangerous, which is why many of the homeless population decide not to go into the shelters. So we need to fix that, and we need to get them into livable situations where we give them dignity. And then that means a pathway. So with prevention services for those who are outstanding, including those who are mentally challenged, and pathways to home ownership, or at least some place over which they can put a roof over their head and have dignity, which is what I continue to have conversations about those who are in challenged position to being homeless. We have the solution at rayformayor.com.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hear from Maya Wiley next.
You know, I've spent my whole career as a civil rights lawyer and advocate, and I was really proud and welcomed the opportunity to stand with the men of the Lucerne on the Upper West Side, because really what emerged there was a model. So first of all, as a civil rights lawyer, I'm going to say it, housing is a human right. And we have the opportunity to actually learn from what we've done wrong. That's instead of spending $3 billion on a shelter system that doesn't work for folks and is often dangerous, and is one of the reasons why so many folks who are mentally ill and need services and supports actually choose to ride the subways or live on the streets, because it's safer for them. And that's a devastating and wrong thing to be happening in the first place. But a housing first strategy where we're actually doing three things. We are, one, increasing the subsidies so that you can actually afford to rent an apartment when you have a voucher from the city. Because right now, so many men, like at the Lucerne, or single adults with these vouchers, only 3% of them can get an apartment because it's $1,200 a month. Now, if you can find me an apartment for $1,200 a month in New York City, I'd be very happy, but that's not the city we live in right now. But the second, in addition to increasing the subsidy structure, is to recognize that we have to change the way we're using our dollars. So rather than congregate shelters, we're actually supporting the housing process by both my New York New Deal plan, which is to spend $10 billion to build things we need built and fix things we need fixed. But that includes building more deeply affordable housing, as well as fixing NYCHA, $2 billion for NYCHA, because that's permanently affordable housing and we got to keep it public. And the third is exactly what you've already said in the question, which is that we have a vacancy issue in this city, and that's an opportunity. Both vacant hotels to transform them into permanently affordable housing, but also our vacancy rates in commercial properties that we can negotiate and use for more affordability.
Thank you. Eric Adams, please. Thank you.
Yes, and this is a real issue for me. You know, growing up in South Jamaica, Queens, my 5 siblings, and I had to deal with being on the verge of homelessness just about every day. You know, for my entire childhood, we carried a garbage bag full of clothing to school every day because my mom thought we were going to be thrown out. And so I know how real this is. Enough that even as a small property landlord, when my tenants moved into my building, I had them sign a lease that as long as they're there, they will never have an increase in their rent. And yes, they're only paying $950 a month in an area that I can easily get $2,000 a month for. So what do? Yes, look at micro units. 2, let's do this in real time. Let's analyze what our real stock looks like. Look at the real needs of housing and pair them with those who are in need. Let's do the rent forgiveness, but at the same time, we have to be extremely careful. For small property landlords, we must give them mortgage relief and utilities. If not, you're going to see the greatest loss of wealth in Black, brown, and immigrant communities in this entire city. And then let's also retrofit our business district, change the zoning laws. Many people are not going to come back in the same capacity. And let's make sure that we look at those who are incarcerated. That's going to be a major population. Let's identify their needs a year out, give them real reentry programs, give them all the documentations they need. We should not place them back into a shelter system that looks like another prison environment. And then let's look at apartment sharing. Many of our seniors have vacant bedroom apartments that we can use. Let's look at basement apartments and legalize them as well. So there's some great opportunities, but we just have to think differently and do it in real time.
Thank you all. We've touched, every one of you has touched a little bit on what our next question is, and I'd love to go a little bit more into depth. Affordable housing as a term that we throw around a lot in the city, but it's truly not affordable for those most in need, and really for the majority of people who are seeking supportive housing. The AMI, area medium income, is not really a good indicator. So what are the alternatives? What would you do to really ensure that housing is going to be affordable for those who are seeking it, and really moving away from this sort of throwing around the term affordable housing when you have rents that are just completely not affordable for the majority of people who need them? Oh, so we're going to use the same. We'll use the same cycle. So I'll have Ray McGuire, please. Thanks.
So listen, the area median income metric factor is a federal government standard based on, today is Westchester County, I think it's $100 and some odd thousand that we have to look to. We have to, unless we're prepared to change the standard, we need to make sure that we look at the standard and bill below that standard, or bill below the area median income. There are examples, one of which to which I will point is what's taking place in the Bronx Common. In the Bronx Common, they have been able to accommodate with 300 and some odd units at $185 million or so, a housing environment, an environment where the rent goes from $225 a month to $1,999 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment. It has housing for elderly. It has a gymnasium. It has solar panels to provide the energy there in many instances. It has a concert hall. It's 163rd Street in Melrose. is an example of that which we can build. It is built below the area median income. And it also makes sure that none of the floors are entirely populated by those who are formerly homeless, all the way up to those people who can pay 100% of AMI. So there are examples that exist today to which we should look in terms of how we build. We need to make sure we're committed to it, make certain that the mayor and the not-for-profit organizations are involved from the outset, make sure we have enough incentives in place for the builders and developers to build. But let's take the leadership in doing this, which is not something that's taking place under this administration. Under this administration, they have built for homes that people who make $80,000 to $100,000 can afford. That is completely excluded those front-end workers, many front-end workers, excluded a huge number of New Yorkers. So let's commit to build. My plan is to commit to build that is below 50% of AMI to accommodate those New Yorkers who are front and center, whom we owe and who deserve, to make sure that they have a place where they can a roof over their head. And it specifically includes our elderly.
Thank you.
Include our elderly.
Thank you. We'll turn that to Maya Wiley. How would we address making housing truly affordable?
Well, let me just start by saying I'm a mom, and I got 2 kids who were born in this city and don't want to live anywhere else. And I was having a conversation with my younger daughter, who is she's 17 now, but she was younger then. She's a creative kid. And she said, Mom, I've figured it out. I've figured out how I can be an artist. She said, I can get a job as a cashier somewhere, maybe in a restaurant or in a store. But I did the math. And that means I would have to be able to find an apartment that was $600 a month. And then she got teary and she said, where can I live? And she was absolutely right, because she had calculated minimum wage and figured out what she could afford. And that is not a city that is going to remain diverse and vibrant and wonderful as New York is if we don't solve that problem. So it starts without stopping the bean counting, not saying X number of units and we just slap the affordable label on it, but actually looking at deep affordability for extremely low income, very low income folks. And that means looking backward from how much people earn and saying, we're going to build housing, whether you earn $15,000 a year or $25,000 a year, not just $150,000 a year or $250,000 a year. And that means our resources and powers from zoning and defining and negotiating how much private real estate's going to do. But as we've already talked about, the city has tremendous opportunity in this crisis right now to build permanently affordable housing at those deep levels. And that's why my New Deal New York plan, which in addition is going to create 100,000 new jobs, because it's also about wages, good union wages, and getting wages up and better jobs so people can actually pay the rent, but to build things like deeply affordable housing, which I'll be able to set. And we have 5,000 units of public housing that sits vacant because we haven't fixed it, and I'll do that too.
Thank you. And Eric Adams, please.
Thank you for that. Let's be clear on something. The city has no idea of what they have and what they don't have. We have a disjointed, dysfunctional system throughout our entire city. HPD is focused on unit count. It's not what HRA is stating we need. There's a lack of coordination based on income bands. We have a large number of units of housing that we can't fill because the income band is too high and no one can reach that. We have a system in the city where the Human Rights Commission is understaffed and undermanned, so they're not conducting the real investigations to determine if someone is not accepting vouchers, and we don't have a real fine system in place to make it or to de-incentivize people from doing this. And what we often overlook, according to the United Way's report, over 40% of the New Yorkers are experiencing a sufficiency deficit. So we're not only talking about low-income New Yorkers, we're talking about middle-income New Yorkers. We have decimated the middle class, and they feel trapped, and they're leaving our city in droves. I believe the real focus should be no person should be paying over 30% of their income to housing. That is our focus. And if we do that correctly, we will ensure that low-income Moderate income and middle class New Yorkers will have a place to live in this city and not be priced out. And that is the focus that I will look at. Not so much AMI, but no one should be paying more than 30% of their income to rent. And we should compensate for that to balance out the AMI requirement that's in place.
Thank you. Okay, we're on to our next section.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Walthall, Executive Director of Faith in New York, and I'm here to ask 2 questions on immigration. The candidate order will be first Ms. Wiley, then Mr. Adams, and then Mr. McGuire. So my first question, New York City prides itself on being a sanctuary city. With over 3 million immigrant residents, including 1 million mixed status households and more than 500,000 undocumented residents, our immigrant population is vital to the economy and culture of our city. The pandemic has further illuminated this fact, with many of our essential workers being immigrant residents who serve our city but live in fear of ICE and have limited access to resources to support their families. As mayor, how will you ensure that our immigrant residents are safe and able to thrive? And please be as specific as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I was really grateful for the opportunity when I served in City Hall to make sure that the city passed the first sanctuary city legislation in its history. And let me tell you what I had to do to push that through from the executive end. It was the NYPD that stood in the way. We got it through, but I say that because it goes back to mayoral control of New York City Police Department, because there can be no agreement to work with ICE to make our residents vulnerable. And it also means making sure that ICE doesn't have access to any of the buildings that we control, so that our residents know they can have access to the supports and services and resources of government. But it also means something else. It means supporting our families. And so one of the things that I have created is a universal care economy plan. And I am taking that money from the New York City Police Department budget, from the Department of Corrections budget by closing Rikers, and also by child care grant, block grant money we leave on the table in the city, so that we're going to create $5,000 care grants to put into the pockets of our families that are the neediest, so that they can care for themselves and their families. And that is going to be something undocumented immigrants are eligible for, because it's time we take care of those who've been taking care of us. And it's also going to include creating universal care centers, which not only creates jobs in the care economy, good jobs, union jobs. I'm proud to be endorsed by 1199 SEIU, but also so that there are drop-off centers, because care is one of the top costs of living in the city. And so often single moms bear the brunt of that, and single parents. But what that creates is a safe place to drop off children for childcare, or elderly parents or grandparents for elder care. That exists in the community, and that's what I'll do, and it'll include undocumented immigrants.
Thank you. Mr. Adams?
Thank you. And I agree with Ms. Wiley that we have no place for ICE in the city. It should remain a sanctuary city. We need to be clear on that. And I have advocated for that, not only as a state senator and a borough president, but even as a police officer. I will definitely expand New York City Cares, proper funding, and ensure that we get the information to people in the language that they understand. This is the big problem we have in this city. We believe this is an English-only speaking city, and we communicate only in English. I will look at and empower the entire census team and use them not only for the every 10 years census gathering, I will use them to get information on the ground. These amazing organizations and groups, they're able to communicate in a language and a culture that people understand, because banning ICE but not giving people the information that they need to know their rights in the city is not going to solve our problems. They don't have to open doors, and there's other things they don't have to do. We need to give them that information. And also, I think it's imperative that we utilize the ID NYC program, give it the right security so it won't be abused, but to use it as a method to allow people to be automatically signed up for the benefits that they have. Countless number of immigrants are intimidated to go into governmental buildings. My City card and using the municipal ID NYC program is a way to ensure we don't continue to return money to the federal government. And lastly, I think it's important that we allow them to vote. I am advocating for those legal residents to have the opportunity to vote in the city so they can elect those who are going to respect their voices.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire?
Yeah, thank you. Listen, throughout my life, I knew that I have to work twice as hard in order to be viewed as half as good. That work ethic and my commitment to giving every child a shot in this city is what lies at the base of my view about the world in New York City. The rich diversity is what makes the city work. I strongly support our immigrant families. We need to make certain that we strengthen ourselves as a sanctuary city. We need to make certain that the social services that exist, that we continue to invest in those social services. We need to do it in a culturally sensitive and culturally aware way. I agree that we need to make it culturally aware when it gets to language. Not everything in this city, given how rich and diverse it is, with the number of cultures, with the number of languages that exist here, we need to make that accessible to all New Yorkers, and we need to invest there. We need to make sure that both our elderly and our children who are immigrants, that we make certain that we take care of them and provide the social services. We need to make sure that those who are more challenged and suffer through the city, that we give awareness to them, and we do it in places that are safe. When it comes to our small businesses, we need to invest there, make certain that when we invest in the programs, the mentorship, and the access to capital, that we do it in languages and cultures that are sensitive to the richness of our diversity. And we need to make certain, as we move forward, to have a path to citizenship. And that path to citizenship ought to be accessible, it ought to be readily available, and we ought to commit to it. This is what makes New York, New York. The immigrant population is fundamental to the richness of this city and how this city thrives, as it has historically, based on immigrants, and as it will under my administration going forward, focusing on our immigrant population and making them part of the fabric of this great city. And that's the commitment that the immigrant community will have from me. I'll fight for the immigrant community every single day.
Thank you. And on to our second question. I just want to preface that Ms. Wiley had to step away. And so the final questions will go to Mr. Adams and Mr. McGuire. So final question. Our immigrant workers have made essential contributions to this economy during the pandemic, often putting their lives at risk while being excluded from key supports, such as stimulus payments and unemployment benefits. As you envision our economy moving forward after the pandemic, how will you prioritize immigrant workers in your recovery plans? Mr. Adams, you're on mute.
That's the new word of the day. I want to first thank the state lawmakers on their amazing bill that really looked at the roles that immigrant workers played in the city. And I know firsthand because I spent the entire pandemic on the ground, giving out PPEs and giving vital services, moving into Borough Hall so I would not infect my family, but I could respond daily. And you know what I saw out there? I saw immigrant workers. Many of them are afraid, particularly when the curfew was put in place, that they were afraid that they would be picked up. But I saw them driving the Ubers when those who were considered non-essential workers were able to stay indoors and get those deliveries. I saw them stock the grocery shelves. I saw them doing the jobs that many people didn't want to do. We divided the city during COVID-19. Black, brown, and immigrants were told to provide services for those who were considered non-essential workers, and that was unfair. Now we need to do our job to make sure that they're compensated, that they won't have to deal with any health issues that has materialized out of COVID. They should be reimbursed as others are for funeral costs. It's unimaginable what it costs to have a fee of that magnitude. And we should never again not have resources going on the ground to those immigrant workers. And we should make sure, as I stated, to invest in New York City Cares with the right information so that they can get the primary health care that they deserve. And this is an opportunity to have a separate pot of money, not only on the state level, but on the city level, to reimburse and to ensure that these essential workers are treated in a fair way. We failed to do that, and we should never allow that to happen again.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
You know, let's acknowledge that the challenges that we're describing here existed before COVID. They've just gotten exacerbated by COVID. The opportunity for our immigrant community to participate in the fabric of this city has always been challenged. And we need to make certain that we take this moment to move forward. Others who've been in their positions had their shot, and now we need to make certain that we're committed to this. And committed to it means that we need to make certain that the service that exists, especially at the local level, with the small businesses that employ many of our immigrant population, that we invest in those small businesses, which is why I focus so much in my economic comeback plan, 50,000 jobs, make certain that our restaurants and small businesses are open and that they can continue to employ the small businesses and the immigrant population. One of the things that I did during the course of COVID was make sure that the small businesses and the faith-based community had access to the PPP. Give them the mentorship, give them the access to the financial institutions that could provide it. In fact, backstopping or giving support to the financial institutions that were providing it, making certain that food got into the communities and the services got into the communities. We need to acknowledge the challenges and yet the opportunities that exist with our immigrant communities. Make certain that we invest in the community-based organizations that are on the ground. Make certain that we continue to support our faith-based organizations that are on the ground. Make certain that we have an infrastructure in place so that we address the anxieties, use institutions like the libraries where people feel safe and can go, and use other organizations within the community that are culturally aware, culturally sensitive, and linguistically broad, so we can give access to our parents and to our children and to the elderly in the immigrant community and the small businesses and the larger businesses that support the heavy employers. And yes, let's make certain that we compensate those who made certain that this city continued to thrive and to operate. We need to invest in our immigrant communities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all, Eric Adams, Ray McGuire, Maya Wiley, for being here. Really quickly, just a one-sentence question for you. You see our broad coalition who is sponsored today. Eric Adams, if you are elected, will you agree to meet with this coalition? Yes or no?
I say yes to that.
Ray McGuire, if elected, will you agree to meet with this coalition?
The answer is yes, and I met with a few of them already. So yes, by all means, I would.
All right. Thank you both so much. And Maya Wiley, we thank you also for joining us.
Thank you for having us, okay?
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Reverend Schuyler.
Well, that's so great to hear. Thank you both for being here and for your commitment to meet with us. Welcome again to everyone who's been with us since 3 o'clock, and welcome to those who've joined us since. We're now beginning the second half of our program and are welcoming our next slate of mayoral candidates. Thank you, Sean Donovan, Catherine Garcia, and Diane Morales for being here. Welcome. You joined today a coalition of over 800 faith communities, representing thousands of people from many different faith traditions across the 5 boroughs. Our time together, like it was in the previous segment, will be divided up into 3 segments, according to 3 topics. We begin with racial justice, the umbrella topic that covers so many of the crises of our day. We followed then by housing justice and immigration justice. Each will be led by a different moderator, and we will ask that each answer be 2 minutes or less. If you as a listener would prefer to listen in Spanish, we hope you will select the interpreter button at the bottom of your screen. You may also select the closed captioning option, which is also there. All questions have been workshopped with the faith communities ahead of time. To ensure that we stay on track and on schedule, we also have one of our wonderful clergy, the Reverend Audette Fulbright of All Souls NYC, to serve as a timekeeper. So candidates, please watch your screen. If you see her appear, if you see a yellow or red sign appear, it is time to wrap it up. Thank you again for being here, all of you, candidates and participants. We begin with a faith moment led by Shinru Sinclair Thompson Rosh, a teacher of the village Zendo.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. I'd like to thank the organizers, and I'd like to thank the participants for showing up today for the forum. It seems to me that many, if not all, of the world's religions and ethical philosophies have taught that the root of the ills and suffering in our world is selfishness or narrow, self-centered thinking and conduct. And they have also taught that we can overcome those ills and that suffering through compassion and through service to others. So my hope is that in the remainder of the conversation today and in the years ahead, we can all look personally and honestly at the way in which we participate in self-interested, narrow self-interested and selfish thinking and conduct. We can look at the ways in which our political and economic structures are also rooted in selfishness, and that we can work together to, in a spirit of solidarity, in a spirit of service, to overcome the inequalities, the imbalances, and the injustice that afflict our communities. Thank you.
All right, Jacqui.
Yeah, I can't start my video, hon. Otherwise, just.
Eric, can you help us?
Ben.
I don't know. Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We're so glad you came today. I'm Jacqui Lewis, Senior Minister at Middle Church. And I have the first question in the racial justice area for you, sir, Mr. Donovan, for Sean Donovan first. The death of George Floyd brought the Globe and New Yorkers to the streets in protest. New York Times reporting at the end of June showed many videos of the New York police in violent clashes with peaceful protesters. So I'm wondering about your stance on policing the police. Reform, defund, demilitarize, abolish. What kinds of thoughts do you have on that, sir? If you can be as specific as you can, that'd be great.
Absolutely, Reverend. And thank you all for having us here today. And it's so important that we begin with this question. And just to ground my own experience and work, 30 years ago this year, I met John Lewis for the first time and retraced the route of the Freedom Rides with an interracial group of students, and began a process of my working in housing, in community development, fundamentally because that is the way we have segregated and separated people over generations in this country and around the world. And my own work in the Obama administration led me to try to give real meaning to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And in fact, when Donald Trump still had a Twitter account last year, he was attacking my work by saying we were trying to destroy the suburbs by ensuring that every American, no matter what they look like, who they love, what language they spoke, could live wherever they chose. And so this is an issue that, while it has emerged more onto the public consciousness and into our streets this past year, it has been with us for generations, and it's been with me for 30 years. Specifically on policing, I believe we need to do three things. We need to fundamentally reform policing. We need to reduce the role of police in our city, and we need to reinvest in our communities. When I say to reform, we need true transparency. We need true accountability. We need training that fundamentally changes the approach of our police. And I believe we also need to ensure that our police reflect our communities. More than half of our police officers live outside the city today, and I would change that as mayor. But I also think we need to reduce the role of the police. They should not be criminalizing homelessness.
Thank you so much.
Be patrolling the hallways of our schools and a number of other things, as well as investing in our communities with $3 billion per year. I'll finish there.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We'll come to you now, Ms. Morales. Diane, hi, with the same question. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. I appreciate the question very, very much, actually. So I was the first candidate in this race to call for defunding the police. That is the language that I use. That is the action that I believe we need to take. I was also the first candidate in this race to call for defunding the police by $3 billion, though I am glad to see some of my peers moving closer to that number as well. Race is not the problem. Racism is our problem. And systemic racism is a generational curse that we've normalized in our society. I believe we've got to see this as the root of our inequities. Otherwise, we'll continue to put Band-Aids on what a situation that requires open heart surgery, essentially. I believe that our communities need to reclaim and redefine what public safety really means. And to us, for me, that means that we need to divest from policing by that $3 billion in year one and instead invest in our communities, in the services, programs, and opportunities that we really lead to safer communities. The first pillar of that in my plan is the creation of a community first responders department that would be staffed by people who are trained and skilled at intervention and de-escalation around issues of homelessness, of substance abuse, of mental health, so that those people could respond to people in crisis and serve as part of a larger ecosystem of human service providers, of medical centers, of mental health providers, and break the cycle of crises that so many New Yorkers are facing. Right now, what we have is police officers responding in these situations. Best case scenario, someone gets locked up and released the next day to the same situation. Worst case scenario, they get harmed or killed. We need to actually meet the crises of our communities with a response that is appropriate to the need. And that is what I think we need to do insofar as policing is concerned.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Welcome, Ms. Garcia. Same question for you. Sorry for coughing on you.
I think it's okay in a virtual world.
Okay, just allergies. Do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I could hear before I was in the audience. But I wanted to say thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity, as well as to say thank you for, I know this is areas where all of these organizations have done such tremendous work. New York City is confronted by both real challenges with trust between PD and communities, but also a spike in crime. And we can have a police department that is treated as a service to communities, that we need to make sure that we are doing neighborhood policing, that we need to increase the age of officers, that we need to do better training, that we need to make sure we are promoting people who walk the walk and talk the talk about a community engagement, and that we are absolutely crystal clear on discipline and that it is transparent, because you actually can't solve crime if you don't have trust with communities, because that is what we are seeing right now. We have to have a fundamental reset moving forward that changes this dynamic.
Thank you so much. Thank you. My second question to you all, in the same order, is a follow-up. Given that the history of policing began with slave patrols in the South, what would you do as mayor to dismantle the legacy of white supremacy in our police department? And please be as specific as you can.
Reverend, for me, it begins with appointing a police commissioner of color. And as I mentioned earlier, ensuring that we are fundamentally remaking the makeup of our police in this city. That includes ensuring that we get rid of the ability of police officers to live outside the city. When I was housing commissioner, every one of my employees needed to live within the city to be part of our community. And that is not true for the police, and that needs to change. Many of the other steps that I talked about in terms of the training, the fundamental change in the accountability and transparency that we have around policing is all going to be critically important. But we also have to recognize that the legacy of that structural and systemic racism isn't just in policing, it's in the criminal justice system more broadly. And we need to break that pattern and that history as well, and put the word justice into our criminal justice system. So I've proposed the most far-reaching plans to remake our correction system and to invest in reentry. That would include not just closing Rikers, but fundamentally remaking our corrections department with a pretrial agency to ensure we're diverting as many people as possible away from incarceration into other solutions. And then, as I said earlier, investing $3 billion a year, 20% of our criminal justice budget, into communities that in ways that fundamentally break the cycle of incarceration as well. And I should say, my experience being part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force with President Obama, I was the one as budget director who took away military equipment from police departments around the country so that we demilitarize them. That's a fundamental element. And we need to invest in housing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Morales, please. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a tough question. Racial injustice is insidious, and it took hundreds of years to perfect and show up in every aspect of our government. There's nothing that is race neutral in this country, and we've got to treat racism, I believe, as a disease and really work to cure all of our systems of it. I think that means really focusing on the gradual and progressive dismantling of the system that is rooted in racist structures. And we start doing that by divesting significantly from policing and investing in the resources that our communities need, particularly the communities that for so long have been disproportionately harmed by policing. The criminalization of being Black and brown, the criminalization of being poor. We see it in our schools. We see it in our healthcare system. I really think that we need to move towards gradually reinvesting, or investing actually, because I don't think we've ever fully invested in the things that our low-income Black and brown communities really need, our immigrant populations, et cetera. For me, I think one of the things I've talked about is investing in an equity data response unit that would really take a look at some of the impact of these systems. I think if we're going to focus solely on the criminal legal system, I would say that we need to create a CCRB, an elected CCRB that has disciplinary power, that we need to create an independent investigators and district, prosecutor's office to pursue cases with the police where police have violated people's human and civil rights. But my larger answer to that question is that, I think we need to look much more broadly, not just at policing, but at our systems at large in terms of the harms that they do to Black and brown communities.
And how about you, Ms. Garcia?
Yeah, thank you. This is an area where we also need to go upstream and look at the fundamental things that cause crime: poor housing, poor access to food, poor access to healthcare, and make sure we are doing the investing in that. But as I said before, we have to fundamentally restructure the police department. We have to get real culture change. The way that you get real culture change is by ensuring that you have done the training that you need to do of the front lines, and particularly your frontline supervision, and you are holding them rigorously accountable for delivering on what you have tasked them with, which is a relationship with community and not an enforcer approach to communities, particularly communities of color. And I really truly understand how you get this done. I have run a uniform agency. I've had a police force. They carried guns in the sanitation department, and you can hold them rigorously accountable for how they interact and what they are doing. For one thing, during the protest, we know that kettling does not work. That wasn't just a rogue officer. That was also creating confrontation that did not need to occur.
Thank you all so much. We'll move to our next set of questions.
Thank you all for being with us. Share some questions around homelessness and housing. As people of faith, we view the fact that there are nearly 60,000 homeless people in New York City, 17,000 among them children, as a moral failing and an ethical imperative. And we want to know, as mayor, what strategies would you employ to make sure that every person has not only a right to shelter, but access to permanent and appropriate housing? We want to know specific examples, including, would you consider transforming empty hotels? Would you extend a moratorium on evictions? What would you do about shelters, et cetera? So please be as specific as possible with your answers. We're going to start with this round with Catherine Garcia, then Diane Morales, then Sean Donovan. We'll do that for each of the two questions. So Ms. Garcia, please.
Homelessness clearly has been exploding, not only during COVID, but even before COVID. We need to have a city that is getting permanent housing for all of its residents, because you know what? That makes everything else possible. Housing heals. When you have permanent housing, you're better in school, you're better in your career, and you're actually healthier. In my approach, in my plan, it's that we will provide vouchers that can actually rent apartments in the city of New York. We will build 50,000 units of deeply affordable housing, meaning below $30,000 a year. We will build 10,000 units of supportive housing. We will consider conversion of hotels to gain housing so we don't have stranded assets. And we will work very closely with our community-based partners for those who are street homeless, who are going to need to have housing that has services as well. We are too wealthy a city to allow people to sleep on the streets or children to sleep in shelters. So I have a homes first policy, not a shelter first policy.
Thank you, Ms. Morales.
Thank you, Rabbi Lauren. So I am a proponent of guaranteed housing for all. I think we need to be able to believe that we can be a city that focuses on not just saying the right things, but on actually doing the right things. That means guaranteeing shelter, affordable housing for everybody. As part of that, I have proposed that we will move away from the shelter-based system and reinvest those dollars into the creation of permanent affordable housing for everyone. An eviction moratorium would be extended, including protections being offered to small homeowners, because we know that for Black and Brown families and communities, home ownership is often the only way for any access to wealth generation or security. I have also called for the conversion of hotel spaces, vacant storefronts, office spaces. If we had the political and the moral courage and will right now, we could actually exercise that and provide housing for all of our homeless in the city. I also believe in the notion of social housing, expanding affordable housing for everyone, where no one would pay more than 30% of their income on housing. And also the creation and the expansion of community land trusts, as well as ensuring that all public lands are no longer sold to private developers, but are set aside for the establishment and the development of affordable housing for all New Yorkers. I think this is how we need to protect our city. This is how we need to move towards aggressively eradicating poverty and providing housing for everyone. And that would be the first step for me.
Mr. Donovan?
Rabbi, thank you for this question. I will say it's deeply personal for me. I became a public servant because I grew up in New York City during the 1970s and 80s, saw homelessness exploding on our streets. And I started asking myself the moral question, Rabbi, that you just posed, which is, how can it be in the wealthiest city, in the wealthiest country on earth, we allow our neighbors to sleep on our streets? And so I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college, actually in the basement of a Lutheran church. and then interned at the National Coalition for the Homeless. And that began a 30-year career working on housing and homelessness. And what is most deeply disturbing to me about having more homeless in this city right now than any time since the Depression is that homelessness is a solvable problem. And I know that because I worked to solve it as the leader of the national strategy under President Obama. We cut street and family homelessness by 25% across the country in just a few years, where we really got the help we needed from Congress and some help from Michelle Obama. We ended veteran homelessness in more than 80 cities and states, not reduced it, but ended it. And we can do that here in New York if we actually reimagine our right to shelter as a right to housing. First, we have to keep people in their homes. We're on the verge of the worst eviction crisis of our lifetimes. That's why I was advocating, even testifying in front of Congress, working with members of Congress to get the eviction moratorium extended and to get tens of billions of dollars of rental assistance into the recent COVID relief packages. I know how to do this. I did it after the Great Recession. When I was HUD secretary, we got assistance quickly to families. But we also have to recognize that street homelessness is not going to be solved by shelter alone. We need supportive housing that combines mental health services, substance abuse treatment. That is how we ended chronic homelessness.
Thank you. Thanks so
That's what
much.
we do here. Thank you.
So thank you so much. All of you have touched in some way about affordability. I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into that question, because we know that what is now called affordable housing is really not affordable for the majority of our communities, and for sure not for the people most in need. So can you talk about, beyond vouchers, and what can we do to really transform housing into being truly affordable for our community? And in particular, how will you manage, the real estate industry in New York, and how that interplays with housing reality and need to build shelter? And that is a huge issue. So just would love to hear again from you. And we're going to go in the same order: Miss Garcia, and then Diane Morales, and then Sean Donovan. Again, thank you.
Thank you. And housing affordability has been a crisis since the 1940s in the city of New York. Part of that is just we don't build enough. We don't build enough at any level, but we as the city need to be building for very low income. So 50,000 units of deeply affordable, 30% of AMI, which is a fancy term, but basically it's about $30,000 for a family of three, and 10,000 units of supportive housing for those who need extra services or have some other issue that requires that. That's where I think we need to be focused. But we also need to make it so that we can have opportunities for home ownership in the city, that we are opening up another Mitchell Lama-like program moving forward, so that we do have both for people who are at very low income have a place to live, but also that folks who are in the middle class have an opportunity to move forward. But we have to also ensure that we are thinking about what we are doing with our partners in Albany about rent stabilization, because they actually control far more of the housing under those regulations than we could build. This is really a moment where we can come together to ensure we are protecting all New Yorkers, and that we are all developing really phenomenal communities. And, I have done capital construction for most of my career. I've done about $8 billion worth of capital construction. I know how to make this move quickly.
Thanks. Diane Morales, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to disagree slightly with my friend Catherine. I actually think that it's not that we don't build enough housing. It's actually that the way that we build it is not focused on those that need it the most. The real estate industry here in the city actually puts the developers in the driver's seat and provides them with, I'm going to say it, Sean, kickbacks that should otherwise be invested directly in communities, with communities in the lead. So, one of the things that separates me, I think, from most other candidates in this race is that I've committed to actually putting communities in the front seat in terms of determining and reforming and transforming the housing market. I think that communities need to be leading the investments, the tax subsidies, the incentives, and all of the write-offs need to actually be directed towards community-based organizations and affordable housing, nonprofit affordable housing developers. One of the ways that I would do that would be by appointing a deputy mayor that would consolidate all of the different currently siloed housing efforts in the city so that we could first begin to eradicate homelessness and then move towards ensuring that everyone has access to affordable housing. I also think that we need to move away from the privatization of NYCHA. I am unapologetically a community first person. I think that we should in fact be centering our communities in terms of leading this process and having the voice and being the drivers. And that is the opposite of what is happening right now.
Thank you, Sean, Donovan. Thanks. Next for that same question about affordability, true affordability.
Thank you, Rabbi. Let's be clear about the relentless math of housing in New York City. If you're a family making $15,000 a year, as so many New Yorkers are, working at minimum wage jobs, piecing together a way to make a living, the truth is that for that family, paying 30% of their income, which is the standard for affordability, they can't even afford the maintenance and the taxes to keep up an apartment in New York, much less the cost of building it. And so if we're really going to change the equation in New York and reach the families who need it most, we're going to need a deep partnership with the federal government, and we need universal access to Section 8 and other affordable housing. Right now, 1 in 4 New Yorkers that is eligible actually gets it. And that has to change. We have an opportunity when we finally have a president in office after 4 terrible years who has a plan for universal access to Section 8. I will be a mayor who works with that president and makes sure that New York is first in line to get a substantial increase in Section 8 to help families that are currently on the verge of eviction, not to mention the tens of billions that's available through the COVID relief packages. I also understand that we will only be running in place if we don't save the affordable housing that we have. Public housing is the single most precious affordable housing resource we have. More people live in public housing in New York than live in Atlanta, Georgia. And we need a mayor who finally understands how to fix NYCHA. And I have a plan, unlike anyone else, to get the $40 billion that we need. Lastly, we do need to build more affordable housing everywhere in our city, rather than focusing it just on Black and brown communities, on our lowest income communities. And I have the full plan to be able to do that everywhere in our city.
Thank you all so much, and thank you for being with us. We're going to move on to our next section and moderator.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Walthall, Executive Director of Faith in New York. I am here to ask 2 questions on immigration. The question order will go with Ms. Morales first, then Mr. Donovan, then Ms. Garcia. So question number 1. New York City prides itself on being a sanctuary city. With over 3 million immigrant residents, including 1 million mixed status households, and more than 500,000 undocumented residents, our immigrant population is vital to our economy and vital to the economy and culture of our city. The pandemic further illuminates this fact, with many of our essential workers being immigrant residents who are serving our city, but live in fear of ICE, have limited access to resources and support for their families, and are even being targeted for hate crimes. As mayor, how will you ensure that our immigrant residents are safe and able to thrive?
Thank you for this question. I am a staunch supporter and believer in the value of and the contributions of our immigrants, documented or undocumented, here in New York City. Worth noting that I stood in solidarity with the essential workers who went on hunger strike for 23 days. Just last month, I I went on strike for one day, and I put my body on the line for them at a protest in Yonkers, as well as being fortunate enough to celebrate with them once the state instituted the fund to provide some relief to immigrant workers. I believe that we need to do much more than what we've done. So one of the things I've committed to is that I will launch the New York City 5,000 in our first 100 days. That will connect with all of our communities, our immigrant communities, in terms of providing culturally and linguistically relevant information to all of our community members, increasing access to healthcare, expanding interpreter services and translator services, specifically in relation to COVID-19 and the recovery from COVID-19, vaccine information, as well as workforce opportunities. I believe also that all of our immigrant community members should be fully protected. I recognize the contributions that they make to our economy. I think that we need to fully and completely decouple NYPD from ICE, from any cooperation with ICE, the ongoing harassment of immigrants that NYPD inflicts upon our communities, whether that be the street vendors, or in any interaction whatsoever, that targets undocumented workers unfairly, and also prohibiting NYPD from collaborating with ICE in our city, as they did, particularly last year during the protests. That means that we need to.
So much.
Thank you.
Mr. Donovan?
Thank you, Crystal. I am the son of one of those immigrants you spoke about. And I am also the grandson of an immigrant as well. My grandfather was one of 10 poor Irish kids who grew up on the south side of London, and as a teenager got on a boat alone to go to West Africa and then South America to find work. My father grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru, and came to this city to find opportunity, as so many immigrants do. And I am fundamentally committed to making this a city of opportunity for every New Yorker, no matter where they come from, what language they speak, who they worship, who they love. I would lead the way to make us a true sanctuary city. And for me, that begins with making sure that every person in this city can build a life of opportunity. That means, especially in a year of a pandemic, to have a public option in New York City that's available to every New Yorker, independent of immigration status. We have over 600,000 uninsured New Yorkers. More than half of them are undocumented. We need to change that, and I would do that. We need to make sure that we are providing housing and all the other opportunity that is available, but doing it in a way that is fundamentally reaches those communities. And that has to do with language access. It also has to do with partnerships with our amazing nonprofit organizations and community organizations around this city. Because the truth is, when there is rightful distrust of government, there needs to be a partnership with communities, because no one will hear the message if the messenger is not trusted. And I would ensure we do that as well. Finally, we need a partner in City Hall who can work with the federal government. My deep relationships with the Secretary of Homeland Security, with the Justice Department, would ensure that we can make this a true sanctuary city.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia?
New York City's heritage and its economy and everything that makes us special is because of our immigrant communities. We have to be a sanctuary city. We have to live up to what that truly means, because immigrants have over and over again made it so that they came and invested and became entrepreneurs here and have brought us back to new tomorrows over and over again. We must decouple ICE and the NYPD, but we also need to support immigrant communities. We need to make sure that they have access to food. They do not apply for SNAP benefits because of the concern about the public charge. When I was responsible for food during COVID, I created systems where there was no check on document status, that no matter the document status, we would deliver you food or you could pick up food. We need to make sure that people feel safe in their schools. that they are coming to school every single day. We need to make sure that there is access to housing. We need to make sure that there's an opportunity for people to get microloans so that they can open up new businesses. We need to not only be a sanctuary city, but we need to be supportive of immigrant communities across the city in order for us all to thrive.
Thank you so much. So on to our second question. Our immigrant workers have made essential contributions to the city's economy during the pandemic, often putting their lives at risk while being excluded from key supports such as stimulus payments and unemployment benefits. As many New Yorkers, we are concerned about the economic revitalization of our city. And so as part of your economic revitalization, how will you center immigrants and immigrant families as part of this revitalization after COVID? And Ms. Morales, we'll start with you.
Oh, great, thank you. So I would seek to expand and grow the Excluded Workers Fund to make sure that we are providing basic income relief for our workers who've been left out of, the federal relief program. I know that the state, we just got a major win at the state level, but I think we need to look forward because that's not going to be quite enough to get through. I also think we need to look to include all our immigrant workers in my proposed expanded urban climate corps and our good public workforce programs here in the city that would provide access to training and jobs in the Green New Deal that I am proposing for the city in terms of greening New York, the infrastructure jobs, the resilience jobs, expanding green spaces, et cetera. I think they should have equal access and equal protection in terms of workers and worker rights. I would also look to invest in comprehensive wraparound services and supports for our immigrant youth and English language learners so that we are creating pipelines to stability and security for them. I've also have been a strong proponent of the providing and establishing the right to vote in city elections, regardless of citizenship status. I think we've got to recognize and acknowledge the contributions that our neighbors are making to the city and give them the right to have a voice, as well as deepening investments in the mayor's office for immigrant affairs so that we are increasing access and education and know your rights information that is available to our immigrant communities in all languages that are spoken in the city. I think that includes partnering with folks from the community and employing those folks from the community so that we're covering every language available in the city.
Thank you so much. Mr. Donovan?
Thanks, Crystal. First, I want to agree with Diane on the point about voting. The lack of political power for so many immigrants in this city, including my father for more than 50 years when he had a green card, means that we are not doing justice to our immigrant New Yorkers, and that has to change with voting for any documented immigrant. Second, we do have to change the way we are investing in our communities around this city. We can predict the life chances, even the life expectancy of a child by the zip code they grow up in. And that's wrong, and it must change. And I would change it by fundamentally reordering the way that we plan our communities toward what I call 15-minute neighborhoods, which would ensure that every single New Yorker would have within 15 minutes of their front door everything that they need for opportunity. They would have a great school. And by the way, I would create 450 new dual language programs to ensure our schools are places where every child in the city, especially our immigrant children, can learn. And I would make sure that everything else, including small businesses and support for them, is available within 15 minutes of their front door. But the last thing I would say is I also understand from my experience starting 30 years ago, working with Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood and East Brooklyn congregations, with South Bronx churches, the power of community-based redevelopment that invests in homeownership and wealth building for every community. And that's why I'm proposing equity bonds, which would give every child in this city $1,000 when they're born, regardless of immigration status. And every year after that, up to $2,000 more, so that a child born into poverty would graduate high school with almost $50,000 in an account to go to college, to be able to start a business, to buy a home. That would change equity in this city more than any single step the next mayor can do.
Ms. Garcia?
Thank you. And I'm going to have to go after I finish this question because I have a hard stop. But I really want to say that I'm happy to have been here today. Look, when we are thinking about what we need to do to be supportive of our immigrant communities, I am extremely pleased with what happened in the state with the fund that has been created, so that we need to ensure that that is getting into people's hands first and foremost. But it is also about my plan to reopen, to stay open for small businesses. So many immigrants work in small businesses, and that is why we need to give them access to the public realm so that they can continue to have commerce. It's what saved us over the last few months. We need to make sure there are microloans for these businesses. We need to make sure that we are seeing a one permit for small businesses. There's like an alphabet soup of companies that you're supposed to, of agencies you're supposed to go to before you can sell a bowl of soup. But also promoting New York City, rediscover NYC. When was the last time you went to Arthur Avenue? When was the last time, when you went to Coney Island? Let's support all of our small businesses because that supports critical people in the immigrant community. They end up being part of that economy. And beyond that, to keep pressing at the state level to ensure that we do have the fund for undocumented workers who have been excluded from federal programs. We have to be able to be creative and move forward so that we are ensuring that all New Yorkers are thriving again. And we know that our immigrant communities are what makes us different and more exciting and a more fun place to be.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to have to go, but thank you. I really appreciate being here, and I hope that everyone who is celebrating Orthodox Easter has a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine and Sean and Diane Morales already had to pop off as well. But Sean, since you are still here with us, are you willing to meet with this broad multi-faith 5-borough coalition if you are elected mayor?
Absolutely. I'm proud to be the last candidate standing here. And I'm also proud, as I said a moment ago, that I started working with broad faith coalitions, East Brooklyn congregations, South Bronx churches, and so many others 30 years ago in my first work in New York. And I will look forward to welcoming you on my first day at City Hall when I'm elected. So look forward to that.
Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you again to Crystal and Jacqui and Lauren, our amazing moderators today. And please don't go anywhere because we actually have a brief presentation from Marilyn Josephs of Faith in New York about how we can all be involved in our first ranked choice voting mayoral election. And before I pass to Marilyn, I want to make sure that you all know that the coalition recognizes that in no way did we touch on all the areas of justice that are important to us as progressive people of faith here in the city, that there are issues of ableism and seniors' rights, trans rights, violence against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, education, environmental justice. The list goes on, and we do not want to imagine that we have touched on all the topics today. But the 3 that we're focused on were chosen by this group for today's conversation. So Marilyn, how can we be informed as we vote?
Thanks, Reverend Amanda. Yes, so in terms of ranked choice voting, we have seen some of the changeover in 2021 with our special elections. We've seen it in the Bronx as well as Queens, and it's now going to hit all 5 boroughs. So we want to remind everyone on this call today that ranked choice voting is the way to go and what will be happening in terms of the system to vote for the mayor, our public advocate, controller, borough president, and city council member. There are 3 quick steps that you can remember in regards to this. Step 1, pick your first choice candidate and completely fill out the oval name next to your candidate. And in this case, with the graphic that we have before us, we see that the first choice was candidate B. Secondly, we want to make sure that if you have a second candidate, that you fill out that oval next to their name in the second column. And again, looking at the graphic that we have before us, candidate F was picked as the second candidate. And you can rank up to 5 candidates in terms of looking at step 3. But moreover, we want to remind everyone that you can still vote for only one candidate if you prefer. And ranking the candidates doesn't harm your overall voting. All right, you want to remember not to vote for all 5 in one candidacy. We see that in the smaller graphic there, or go straight down any particular row. We also want to remind you of some key dates that you should remember as we think about the primary election coming up. May 28th, if you're not registered to vote, that is the deadline. So you want to remind those in your community to register to vote. And again, you have up until May 28th to do so. June 7th is our deadline for a request for absentee balloting. And so if you want an absentee ballot, again, June 7th is that date. June 22nd, right, is the deadline to submit that absentee ballot, because guess what? That's primary day as well, right? So we have primary day on June 22nd, and the polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so if you need more information about your polling site, where to go, because there are differences in terms of the voting process, you may go to Vote NYC. And lastly, in terms of reminders, early voting happens June 12th to June 20th. So we do have the opportunity to do that as well. So those are some of our key dates. And again, Vote NYC can be an option for more information. Thank you. Back to you, Reverend Amanda.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. Simran, can you close us out of this amazing afternoon together? Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, and nice to be with you all. I'd say we give thanks for all our blessings, for the privilege to connect with one another, for the privilege to serve one another. We know that leadership and service are often taken separately as 2 discrete ways of engaging with the world around us. We tend to think of leadership as how those with power influence those around them, and service as a way of supporting those without power. And yet we know that the 2 go hand in hand. We know that we each have our own forms of power, and that we are all servants, and that we are all leaders. May we recognize our great privileges, and may we deploy them for the betterment of our world, and for the betterment of our city, and for the betterment of our communities. May we all live as servant leaders grounded in compassion and humility. May we abstain from working for our own gain and from serving ourselves. And instead, may we connect with our people and serve them selflessly with a vision of equity, liberty, and justice for all. In the Sikh tradition, we refer to this selfless, love-inspired service as seva. It's both the natural expression of our love and the practice for cultivating love. And in this spirit, may loving service be our goal, and may loving service be our daily practice, all so that we may create a more loving, more just, and more equitable world for all of us. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Thank you. Great job.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.